Chapter 1. Wary from the Start. In some ways, my career on Wall Street began as a fit of youthful rebellion, sparked by a dare, a challenge thrown down by my father. He had made his career as a well-regarded lawyer and regulator for the SEC in Washington, and once I graduated from the University of Texas in Austin, he mentioned he could set up an interview for me at Morgan Stanley, should I ever so desire. Some time later, I had no choice but to ask him about it. I was unemployed, having been fired from my first job out of college, and I was staying in a storage unit on the outskirts of Austin because the rent was incredibly cheap. So I drove to the Barton Creek Square Mall, walked to the payphone beneath the main escalator, made the call to my dad, and asked him to arrange the Morgan interview. I was ready to become a stockbroker. His response still resonates 3 decades later. "Son, I'll get you an interview, but you're never going to be any good at this." That hurt me. It all but destroyed me, and I thought, what a shitty thing to say to your son. Instead of saying that and getting into an unnecessary spat, I said, "Dad, just let me give it a shot," before admitting, I don't know what else to do. Like most fathers and sons, my dad and I had a complex relationship. He was a fierce man, blunt-spoken in the way real men used to be, without getting accused of the toxic masculinity that offends some sensitive souls these days. He had grown up in Philadelphia and never knew his own father, and he had worked hard all his life. While attending law school, he worked 3 different jobs at once, bagging groceries, working in a pharmacy, and landing a coveted slot on the law review at the George Washington Law School in the same month in which his 3rd child was born. That would be yours truly. When my dad entered the room, he owned it. He could be demanding, and I could be ornery on occasion, determined to prove him wrong, especially regarding any doubts he held about me. My father agreed to set up the introduction to Morgan Stanley on one condition. "If I get you an interview, it's going to be in New York, and if you succeed, you're going to be in New York." That is where he was based. Only years later did I realize that my father, in telling me I would never be any good at this, sought to provoke me into joining the firm to prove him wrong. Though he might never say so outright, he wanted his son to move back to New York to be closer to him and my mom. They had divorced a couple of years earlier. I wish I had realized this at the time. Life is poorly organized. By the time you finally know the things you are supposed to know, such as the notion that my dad wanted me home and dared not admit it, you already have lived through those moments, and it is too late. You can try to apply those lessons to future events, but often new lessons are needed, unknown in the moment, and to be learned only afterward, when yet again it is too late. And yes, this also is an apt description of the ups and downs of investing. I would join Morgan Stanley, but only after ginning up a scheme that let me move from New York back to Texas, where I would spend the rest of my career, thus far anyway. From the moment I started cold-calling local business owners in the Southwest to start building my book of new clients for Morgan Stanley, I was wary of the business. This wariness runs deep in me, maybe down to my DNA. I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, a bedroom community for people commuting to government jobs nearby in Washington, D.C. My father, David Martin Butowsky, was the head of enforcement at the SEC from 1962 until 1970. At the SEC, it was my father's mission to make sure what Wall Street did was right, that it followed the rules. Because of his job, I met my first financial swindler when I was all of 13 years old. In fact, the man taught me to play craps. Weird, right? His name was Robert Lee Vesco, and he was an infamous fugitive financier who had fled the U.S. to Costa Rica in 1973, amid allegations that he had looted an investment company and stolen almost $250 million of investors' money. That is $1.6 billion in today's dollars. He also was wanted for making an illegal $200,000 campaign contribution to President Nixon's run for re-election in 1972, using as his middleman the president's nephew, Donald Nixon, whom Vesco had employed as a gopher to gain an in at the White House. By the time Vesco went on the lam, my father had left the SEC and moved to New York to form his own firm. A federal judge appointed him to be a special counsel and investigate Vesco's many shady deals and who else had profited. All of this while Robert Vesco and half a dozen of his henchmen were fugitives in Central America and beyond the reach of the law. Catch 'em if you can. Their cat-and-mouse courtship over the ensuing 4 years is worthy of a Hollywood script, a la Catch Me If You Can. As my dad pursued Vesco in Costa Rica, Colombia, the Bahamas, and Cuba, questioning him and seizing assets along the way, they would end up developing a begrudging admiration for each other and building a friendship that no one else knew existed. Vesco enjoyed teasing my dad in a good-natured way, sending him a birthday cake on his birthday for a few years running. Vesco called him the Whale, a joking reference, apparently, to my dad's ample girth. Never did my father lose sight of the flawed character of the man he was pursuing. As he would note in 1977 in the opening of his final report on the case, spanning more than 900 pages, "This report is lengthy, its subject complex, but let there be no mistake about it. The report demonstrates that Robert Vesco is a thief." You have heard of the Ponzi schemer Bernie Madoff, exposed in the financial collapse of 2008. He fleeced his investors for more than $10 billion, but all he did was pretend to trade. Robert Vesco was far more audacious and industrious. He did deals for real, and he had so many fingers and so many pies on all sides of the deals that he would have made a great investment banker at the Goldman Sachs of today. He was a hard bargainer, manipulative and shrewd, and aggressive as hell. As Dad put it, Vesco is obsessed with control over persons, transactions, and events. He has a keen perception of how to influence people. He has a superb intellect and is able to master virtually any given problem to suit his own ends, no matter how complex and no matter what ethical considerations may be present. He has a magnetism which attracts people to him, and he utilizes whatever additional leverage may be available to turn them into adherents to his cause. A Detroit-born high school dropout, Vesco moved to New Jersey and later parlayed a bank loan into a controlling stake in a small, publicly held valve maker named International Controls Corporation. In 1970, he used ICC to take control of a troubled investment company with more than $1.5 billion in assets, Investors Overseas Service. Vesco initiated dozens of dubious transactions among various entities he secretly controlled, spread across Geneva, Switzerland, and the Bahamas, the Netherlands Antilles, the UK, Canada, and his home turf of New Jersey, inevitably converting investor assets for his own personal use. In the special counsel report, my father seems especially irked that Vesco used ICC funds to buy a Boeing 707 jetliner for $2.3 million for his personal use. Vesco spent $600,000 sprucing it up. As David Butowsky tartly notes in his report, ICC clearly had no valid business purpose for acquiring the 707. Its acquisition was made at Vesco's whim and for his pleasure. The renovations to the 707 rendered it commercially useless by decreasing its capacity to 33 seats. They included a discotheque area with a wooden dance floor, a bar and entertainment center, including a stereo receiver, tape deck, rhythmic lighting, a wine rack, and a movie screen and projector, a master bedroom, a sauna, and soaking bath and shower facility. That same pimped-out 707 would carry Robert Vesco to Costa Rica when he fled the U.S. in early 1973. Some years later, federal agents would seize the jetliner. Undeterred, Vesco, in exile, attempted using a Panamanian shell corporation to buy back his plane. Ballsy. Later, Elvis Presley agreed to buy the 707 for $1.5 million. In response, Vesco's shell company threatened Elvis, telling him it would seize the plane. When the king reneged on the deal, one of the parties involved sued him for it. Eventually, my father tracked Vesco to the Bahamas and one of only 2 hotels on Paradise Island. Dad brought me with him on one trip to meet Vesco and interview him some more. One day, we are waiting in the hotel lobby, near the craps tables, and Vesco strolls right up to us and says with a convivial air, "Hello, David." That is when I met Robert Vesco for the first time. As a boy, watching him and my father give each other the business, it seemed that they kind of liked each other. In later trips to the Bahamas, we would visit with a fugitive from U.S. Justice. In my memory, at least, we played a lot of craps. At one point, my father triumphantly succeeded in seizing Vesco's 400-foot-long yacht, with its own mini-submarine and helicopter. I still have the family photos of all of us standing in front of it and smiling, as if this vessel belonged to us. Vesco had managed to buy the $1 million yacht, even while he was a fugitive from justice. He had named it for his wife, Patricia III. At one point, it was seized by U.S. Customs in Miami, and in July 1975 it was mysteriously stolen while docked for repairs. Magically, it ended up in the Bahamas, where my dad hoped to re-seize it. The seizure was short-lived. A day later, the yacht disappeared, taken away by Bahamian authorities. As my dad recounts, special counsel gave chase to the yacht, and this court entered an order requesting the cooperation of the Bahamian court. But the yacht was moved again to Panama. There it underwent 3 name changes and became owned by someone who was discovered to be a Vesco associate. Report: the seizure, retention, and subsequent loss of the yacht Patricia III is another example of the steps which Vesco has taken to retain property obtained illegally. Ultimately, Vesco landed in Cuba in 1982, where he was sentenced to 13 years in prison after being accused of defrauding Fidel Castro's government by getting it to invest in a wonder drug. He was released in 2005 and is said to have died of lung cancer in 2007, though Cuban authorities never officially reported it. While the Vesco case was my father's most famous, he may have played a far more important role in another matter. In advising independent directors of mutual funds, he helped design and institute a new rule regarding the creation of Class B shares in mutual funds, a more accessible way in for small investors. This dramatically lowered investor fees from a stiff 5% at the time to what is comparatively pennies today. It would help create the current mutual fund industry, a booming business with $16 trillion in Americans' nest eggs. We lived in Chappaquiddick, New York. In high school, I was a jock, playing halfback on the football team, albeit nowadays I have the build of an offensive lineman. From the start, I had an affinity for the underdog, which I traced to a lesson in the 3rd grade when my teacher, Mr. Ferris, taught us the meaning of the word empathy. By the time of my senior year in high school, during the Iranian hostage crisis, it was only natural for me to come to the defense of an Iranian classmate of mine after he was beaten up at our school. Though I hadn't known him, I visited him at the hospital to reach out to him and assure him the rest of us at school cared about him, and later another friend and I visited him as he recuperated at home. This small gesture was deemed a big enough deal at the time to garner a story in the local newspaper, in which I was quoted as also forgiving the American kid who assaulted my new Iranian friend, because everybody makes mistakes. Headline: Give these students an A for goodwill. I graduated high school in 1980 and started out at Ithaca College in New York, playing tailback on the football team, which had been Division III national champion the previous year. My sharpest recollection is our loss to Dayton University on national television, 63-0. After my freshman year, I moved to Texas for love, or what at the time I thought was love. My fair-haired high school girlfriend, whom I planned to marry, had headed off to Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Her father had sent her there, I was sure, in hopes of prying us apart. It was a wise move for a daughter's father to make, and one I would make too. Given my ornery nature at the time, however, his tactic may have made me all the more determined to pursue her. So I made my way to Dallas, planning to surprise her by showing up unannounced at her dormitory, like Dustin Hoffman in some scene out of The Graduate. Late one fateful night, I got to her dorm, suitcase in hand, and discovered a note she had tacked to her front door, instructing her dorm mates what to say if I should call. "If Ed calls, tell him I am at the library." Meanwhile, she would be out with someone named Pete. Pete? Who the hell was Pete? My heart sank right out of my rib cage. I felt sick to my stomach, and I stumbled out into the night and started hitchhiking. I was devastated. It was the first emotionally crushing experience of my young life, and in my instant reaction of fight or flight, I picked flight. When the first driver picked me up, I got in his car and made a simple request. "Please take me to the airport." The driver did. It's just that he dropped me at the wrong one. I was unaware there were 2 airports in Dallas, an international airport that could let me fly to hundreds of different places, and a local outlet known as Love Field, with flights to smaller markets like Austin and Little Rock, Arkansas. I was at Love Field. The only departing flight was to Austin, so I got on it, with no idea of what I would find. Instantly, I fell in love with the city and decided to transfer from Ithaca College to the University of Texas, UT, figuring it was close enough to allow me to drive over to see my high school sweetheart in Dallas, Pete notwithstanding. A lot of guys might have bailed rather than move closer to the high school sweetie who had just crushed them. Plus, I was a Jewish outsider in Texas, a land of Bible-thumping Christians. I felt self-conscious and would avoid mentioning my faith until people got to know me better. Years later, my father would tell me that one of the most difficult things about being my dad was his being constantly surprised and puzzled by my unorthodox and unexpected reactions to situations that seemed to have only one appropriate response. It is my way to choose the road less traveled, and I am especially dogged in my determination to attain something once I set my sights on it. A girl like that. Sometimes, however, in pursuit of one thing, you set your sights on something better. I was in my sophomore year at UT in Austin, still visiting my girlfriend in Dallas on weekends, when I met the true love of my life, the woman I would marry and stay partners with right up to these very days. Her name is Dani, and upon meeting her, I was thunderstruck. Instantly I was reminded of a trip I took with my father when I was 14 years old to attend a UCLA basketball game. From the bleachers, we spied an inordinately lovely, beaming blonde cheerleader, vivacious and teeming with life. "Son," my dad told me as we admired her from afar, "you ever meet a girl like that, you bring her home." Dani was a girl like that, and she danced at basketball games as a member of the Texas Stars at UT. We met cute. On Christmas break in New York, I left a day earlier than planned and, to get home to Texas, had to take a connecting flight to Atlanta, which I had never done before. At the Atlanta airport, awaiting the final leg home to Austin, there she was, seated near the gate and waiting for the same flight. A stunner. I approached her and asked her if she would watch my bag for me for a moment. A brazen ruse she abided, whether or not she was aware of it. On the flight, we played cards. She never had played war before, which still cracks me up, and I kept cheating by pulling the same card over and over again from the bottom of the deck, the ace of hearts, fittingly enough. It felt like we had the entire plane to ourselves. When I sat in the bleachers of a sparsely attended UT basketball game a few nights later to watch Dani dance, it was as if she and I were the only two people there. The rest of the world was out of focus. We dated for 9 years before finally getting married in 1991, and she has endured my company for a total of 36 years as I write this. It occurs to me that the difficulties inherent in being with someone like me should guarantee her expedited entry to check in at the pearly gates of heaven when her time comes. She has earned it. I graduated UT in 1985 and, reluctantly, left Danny behind in Austin to take an advertising job in Houston at a branch office of the storied worldwide firm of Ogilvy and Mather. Think Mad Men set to an 80s soundtrack. A few months later, my boss fired me and told me I didn't fit in at the firm, which was a correct call. O&M handed me 2 severance checks, one for $2,700, the other for $1,300. Together, they were the fattest paycheck I had ever snagged, and I was delighted. It felt like a raise. My thinking, this is fantastic. Now what do I do? I boxed up my belongings, packed them into a small U-Haul trailer that I hooked to the back of my black standard shift Celica, and left Houston to head back to Danny in Austin. We had been dating for 5 years by this time. As I got to Austin, I saw a billboard for a public storage place. First month, any size, $1. I'm not going to do this, am I? I said to myself as I pulled into the place. I walked in, put down $1 for the biggest space available, and moved in on the sly, setting up my sofa, fan, dresser, everything I owned. I stayed there for 3 months, showering in a nearby health club and staying with friends now and then and working odd jobs while I was figuring out what to do with myself. Eventually, Danny graduated and moved back to her hometown of Houston, and I felt I had to get serious and find some traction. Recalling my dad's offer of an introduction at Morgan Stanley, I called in the favor and, soon after, found myself starting an entry-level training program in the financial district in Lower Manhattan on the 73rd floor of the World Trade Center, Tower 2. I loved it. This was my calling. This was something I could be good at doing. I spent my nights in what amounted to Jewish homelessness, crashing on my cousin's couch for a few months as I studied for the stockbroker's test, a difficult and complicated challenge known as the Series 7 exam. All brokers must pass it to get a license to trade stocks for clients. Fail it as a trainee, and you will be fired. Morgan Stanley had an extra catch. If you pass the Series 7, you must work in the office in which you had trained for the exam. If you fail the Series 7, we fire you, and you cannot get rehired. So I realized that if I passed, Morgan Stanley would keep me in New York, near my father, but far away from my sweetie. Danny and I had agreed we wanted to live together in Dallas. She didn't want to live in New York. What to do? I decided to take a dive, setting out to intentionally fail the Series 7. The test posed 250 questions, 125 in the morning, followed by a break, and then 125 questions in the afternoon. In the second session, I never even looked at the questions, filling in the answer bubbles with my number 2 pencil in an arbitrary, random pattern. Yet I damn near passed the thing anyway. You needed 70% to pass. I got 67%. Great story, right? Also disturbing. I almost passed the seminal Series 7 exam, which would have let me become a licensed broker, even though I didn't even look at any of the questions for the entire second half of the test. My father never knew any of this, because I made sure never to tell him. It would have made him angry for various reasons, and I think he might have appreciated my effort to spare us the clash over it. He passed away in 2003. Morgan Stanley fired me. I returned to Dallas and Danny, and soon afterward I called the Dallas office of Morgan Stanley looking for work. A brazen move, now that I look back on it. I was well aware of the Morgan rule. After getting through to the branch manager at the time, Alan Schroeder, I told him in unflinching fashion that I had lost out on a Morgan job in New York after taking the Series 7 and failing it on purpose. He chided me, "That's not a good thing to tell people. The branch manager in New York spent a lot of money training you, and you wasted it. Here's the deal. Me. I can see that. Here's the deal. You hire me, and I'll be the best broker you ever hired. I will do everything you say and exactly what you tell me to do. Nobody works harder than I do. Happily for me, he was intrigued enough to tell me he would go to the region and ask for this, essentially seeking approval to break the rules and rehire me. A few weeks later, he brought me on board. The first few months I spent studying and passing the Series 7 and learning about Morgan Stanley products and processes, and my first day as a full-fledged broker came on the day after the terrifying stock plunge of Black Monday in October 1987. The Wall Street Journal would later dub it Terrible Tuesday, as the world's giant banks and governments scrambled to avoid a global liquidity crisis that threatened to freeze markets and create more panic, resulting in a new round of plunging stock prices. Now, you might think that would be terrible timing, but it actually was propitious. When stocks are rising and all is hunky-dory, nobody wants to take a broker's call, especially not a cold call with a sales pitch. After a market panic and a big crash, wealthy clients with money at risk are keen to hear from advisors. They seek protection, and they listen harder to what an advisor has to say. The aftermath of Black Monday was a great time to be shopping stocks, mutual funds, and other investments to shell-shocked investors. It felt like everybody wanted to talk to me. This enabled me to deliver on all of my promises to the branch manager and then some. All I can remember is that I never stopped working, and I made sure to work harder than everyone else. At Morgan Stanley, most brokers are doing well to open 35 accounts a year. In my first year, I opened 206 new accounts and was named a Rookie of the Year. Quickly, I learned to start cold calling by 7 a.m. to reach business ballers before their secretaries arrived at work to screen me out. I would pause to work out at 4 p.m. when the markets closed, and then come back and resume calling from 6 to 8 o'clock at night, eating dinner at my desk, head home and get back at my desk and on the horn by 7 a.m. again the next morning. Rinse and repeat. After 2 years, I was the number one broker in my office. By my third year, I was the top performer in the Southwest region, and 7 or so years in, I was one of the top producers for Morgan Stanley nationwide, at the forefront of a vanguard of 14,000 salesmen. I thrived by following, with blind faith, everything Morgan Stanley told me to do. How many prospects to call every day, what key things to say, which products to sell. I thought to myself, if they say jump higher, I jump higher. If they say run faster, I run faster. Whatever they said to do, I did, exactly. They liked the cut of my jib so much that they had me making motivational speeches to brokers at Morgan Stanley conferences. When Jack Kemp, the head of mutual fund sales at Morgan Stanley, hosted a meeting telling all of us brokers about the hot new mutual funds we could sell, we all got excited. He was committed to all of this, and we were too. We felt that rah-rah energy to get out there because we really believed we were doing good things for people. The same exact thing was going on at every single firm. Yet something was missing. I started to see through certain things in the industry, and it bothered me. I wasn't really managing other people's money. I was simply selling Morgan Stanley's chosen mutual funds and other products to generate fees for the firm. I was told to go out and sell 3 mutual funds: Dividend Growth, American Value, and U.S. GVT. I didn't even know what U.S. GVT was, though I later learned that it was a fund for bonds floated by the U.S. government. Near the end of every month, we were encouraged to make a few trades in our clients' accounts, move a few pieces around to show action and active management, just before sending out each monthly statement that would disclose our fees. The bulk of trades for Wall Street portfolios is racked up in the final week of every month or at the end of each quarter. This cynical kind of practice remains endemic to Wall Street. Meanwhile, we lacked any defined policy aimed at ensuring the portfolios we had built for our customers were proper for their individual profiles, as defined by age, geography, cost of living, spending patterns, appetite for risk, resistance to losses, and so on. Gradually, it occurred to me that I had never been taught the black art of how to construct and manage a portfolio of any kind. When I asked my friends and colleagues in the business about this, they all agreed that the same lapse existed at every firm on the street: Goldman Sachs, Merrill, UBS, all the rest. Our clients, casting aside doubt and trusting in us, clearly believed we had been trained intensively in how to invest their money, but that was and is far from the truth. Moreover, none of us had any concrete way to score how much risk each account was undertaking to achieve the returns it was targeting. This is a stunning vulnerability that afflicts all of Wall Street. We are ill-equipped to protect you from that risk, to design ways to offset it, and to let you reap new profits on it. This has been true for the last 40 years, and it is still true today. And it is a looming financial mass suicide, potentially affecting millions of investors. However wary I grew because of these factors and flaws, I kept selling, kept pursuing new clients, and kept right on making money from my accounts. I opened an entirely separate office for our booming practice, serving high-end clientele, based in part on the production I was generating for the firm. What bugs me, especially now, is that I was falling short in protecting these people. I was failing to put them into investments that would rise in value as stocks tumbled. I was leaving them inadequately prepared for the losses they might suffer due to a few changes in the economy. This unsettled me a lot, because when I tell people I will protect them, that they are safe in my hands, it obligates me to deliver on that protection. And if I am failing at it, I am failing them. I refuse to submit to that. Worse, nobody was doing any better for their clients, and some were doing far worse. It took me another 20 years to learn better methods, to actually invent a new system for evaluating your advisor's recommendations, while quantifying and evaluating your portfolio's risk level and its abilities to deliver high enough returns to cover your true increase in the cost of living. 2 decades of insights. 20 years is a long time, especially on Wall Street. You get the benefit of my hard-won, hard-headed struggles, the CHIP score, just by reading this book. My father, intimately familiar with the psyche and psychology of Wall Street types, may have detected my growing sense of disillusionment. We stayed in touch as my tenure grew at Morgan Stanley. At some point during my first decade in the business, I had earned enough respect from him that he handed me a small portion of his retirement account to invest for him. I was proud to double his $12,000 in short order, although he couldn't tap the cash until after age 70. "Well, son," he told me on one of our periodic phone calls, "I'm so happy you doubled $12,000 to $24,000. But I'll be dead before I'll ever get a chance to use it." Now this stung hard at the time, and once again, only later did I realize the real picture. Dad was making a joke, teasing me and urging me to keep proving myself to him, even doing so at his own expense, knowing he would likely be leaving this earth long before I would. Now that I look back on it, it was a funny line. Like I said, life is poorly organized.